Hey you guys, it's Peter, and welcome to my channel, Peterisms, where I tell stories of my life and just little things that I have learned as I have grown into the person that I am today. And I'm just going to kind of wing this video today because this is actually a topic that somebody asked me to do a video about. If the person wants to sound off in the comment section below, I will let them, but I'm not going to say their name on video, you know, unless they don't want, in case they don't want their name put out there. But somebody was sharing with me that they had gotten sober, not necessarily out of necessity, but just that they, you know, had gotten pregnant and then they had chosen to stay sober after that. And it's been several years. I think it's been like 5 years, they said. And so they suggested that I do a video about people that aren't necessarily alcoholics, but choose to not drink or choose to be sober. And also, you know, like reasons why people get sober. And I think it's a really interesting topic. You know, I talk a lot about sobriety over here and I talk a lot about addiction and alcoholism, but I don't necessarily talk about sobriety as a choice. I mean, sobriety is always a choice, right? Like that we make, but I don't talk about sobriety as a choice that somebody can make that's not necessarily an alcoholic. And what's interesting that I got this request for this video, and I was so happy that she asked me to do this video. The reason, what's interesting about this is that one of the questions I get asked, and I don't typically, I'll be honest with you, I don't respond to very, very serious DMs, okay, that people ask me very serious. If people, every once in a while, depending on if, like, how well I know the person, or if I've known that they've, like, you know, watched my videos for a long time, or have interacted with them, if they ask me pretty serious stuff, I'll respond to them, but typically I don't, okay? When people ask, because I'm like, I'm just a YouTuber, this is not my place to put out advice and stuff like that, right? But I'll get people that will say to me, you know, like, I don't know if I'm an alcoholic or whatever, and then, like, I'll try to say it, you know, in a Peterisms video or a vlog or whatever, or I'll say, like, I'm going to address this in a Peterisms video, and then I'll make a video about it, right, from time to time. But in my personal life, because people know I've been sober for so long, and that, you know, a lot of my friends are sober and things like that, people will call me every once in a while, and it's really strange, because it's always people that I went a million years would, like, I mean, I've gone to dinner with them, I've been out with them. It's never the one that, like, I'm kind of I'm worried about this person, like they have a problem. Typically, like, if I'm that worried about somebody, I'll go to somebody and say, like, I'm a little worried about you, you know? And in all honesty, at my age, with the people that are around my age and things like that, when I've had those conversations with people, I'd say, like, in the last 10 years, you know, and I'll just say, like, as a sober person, like, I'm not trying to push this on you, but, like, some of the things that, like, you worry me a little bit. Like, I want you to be happy, you know? And it's interesting because I would say, like, the last 5 or 10 years that I haven't had a lot of those conversations, but, you know, 2 or 3 maybe in the last 10 years, those have been received really, really well from people. You know, they'll say, like, yeah, it's really something I need to think about. Usually they always go the route of going to therapy first and then kind of deciding whether or not they, you know, want to go to treatment or a 12-step program or church or maintenance program or whatever, right? So anyway, but, you know, it's interesting because I have had quite a few people that have reached out to me. And like I said, it's never anybody that, like, okay, so I've had a lot of people that have reached out to me and been like, hey, I wanted to talk to you because I know you're sober. And they'll always text me first. And they'll be like, do you have a couple minutes to have a conversation because I need to talk to you about, or do you have a couple minutes to talk because I need to talk to you about something? I'm like, I haven't heard from this person in like a month. It'll be like somebody that will be like, you know, the spouse of, like, you know, a partner that, you know, we've interacted with for years and whatever. And they'll call me and they'll say, you know, like, I'm really not happy right now. And, you know, like, I've noticed that, like, when I come home in the evenings and, it's usually, I would say, 100% about alcohol. I've had a couple people reach out to me about pot, but it's mostly alcohol that I would say. And they'll say, you know, like, when I come home in the evenings, like, I have a couple drinks, or, you know, it's not always, like, people that are in relationships. A lot of single people reach out to me, too, and be like, you know, I work all day long, and then I come home, and before I know it, I've had, like, a bottle and a half of wine. Like, do you think that's normal? And I'm always like, well, it's not really mine to tell you what I think is normal or not, you know? And there's a way that we're taught in 12-step programs that we're programs of attraction, not promotion. So it's not like I would call somebody up. Like, to say to somebody I'm worried about them, like, that's that. I always, when they say to me, what do you think? I'm like, well, if you ever want me to take you to a meeting, I'm here for you. You know, if you ever want me to introduce you to people, I'm here for you, things like that. But it's not my job to be like, you need to do this and I'm going to take you, right? Like, that's not what we do. And so our stories and who we are is just the promotion, right? And so people come to us and ask us questions, and we're just like, this is what I do. And if you want what I have, you can do what I do, or you can find it other ways, which is why I say that there's 1,000,001 ways to get sober out there, right? Okay, not 1,000,001, but there's, let's say, 10 ways to get sober. People do different ways. And what works for other people is what works for them. I work a 12-step program because that's what works for me. So anyway, but I'll have people call me and they'll be like, like, I don't know if I'm an alcoholic or not. And, I don't know, like, should I go to meetings? Should I go to treatment? Like, whatever. And, in recovery, one of the things that we suggest is controlled drinking. Like, if you don't think that you're an alcoholic, that maybe you should try some controlled drinking. And controlled drinking is where, like, let's say if you're drinking every night, right? What you'll say is, maybe it's not even that you don't drink every night. Maybe it's that you say, okay, I'm going to drink every night, but I'm only going to have 1 glass of wine instead of a bottle and a half, right? Or maybe it's that you say, okay, I'm going to allow myself to go and drink 3 times this week, but instead of getting wasted drunk and having 10 beers, I'm going to have 2 beers or 4 beers. And then you limit yourself at that, right? And you try that for 30 days or so. There's no limit on it, whatever limit you want to put on it. And then I always say to people, like, if you get to the, that time and you realize you're really struggling with this controlled drinking, the reality is maybe you can't control your drinking. Maybe it's a bigger problem than you think it is. That's usually what I suggest to people, And, I always say to people, if you want to help finding a therapist, I always recommend people to psychologytoday.com. I think it's a great resource. No, I'm not sponsored by them, but you can go to the top and say, find a therapist and just put it in there. And then that's how we found our last therapist and stuff like that. And so I think everybody's in this area is typically listed on there. And I'll be like, you can just find, who's got your insurance panel or a sliding fee scale or what their specialties are and stuff like that. And that's in every state in the United States. Just so you put your zip code in there and it'll pull up a bunch of therapists, treatment programs, everything. You can even put in like what specialties you want them to have and whatever, right? They take insurance if they're on a sliding fee scale, if they take Medicare, Medicaid, things like that. It's all listed on there. So anyway, sometimes I'll say to people, well, maybe you go have a couple sessions with a therapist, see how that works for them, whatever, right? I have had so many people that have come to me and asked me that, and I have to say, it's interesting that a couple people that I've known that have ended up getting sober, going to treatment, going to a 12-step program, that I'll be in all honesty, I had no clue that they had any kind of problem whatsoever, right? And so it's always so crazy to me, the reasons that people get sober. I think, when I got sober, the reason that I got sober was I kind of ran out of options, if you want to know the truth. My dad had set all these boundaries and limits in place. I didn't really know how to take care of myself. So my plan was just to stay sober for a while until everybody got off my ass. What happened was that staying sober for a while turned into this inner peace that I had. And I felt so much better being sober. I was saving money. I was achieving things. I was being successful. And for the first time in my life, I was I feel accomplished in something. And so I was I want to keep on doing this. And it was very much my first 2 years, every day I woke up and I was do I want to continue to do this? It wasn't I was I'm going to be in this for the rest of my life, which is one of the reasons why I choose to say that, I'm a recovering alcoholic and addict. Not that I'm recovered. There's a lot of people that I know that believe that, that they're recovered from the disease of alcoholism and addiction. And it tells us that in our basic text, too, that you can be recovered from this disease. The reason why I say that, recovering is really more of a treatment term. The reason why I say that is because I feel I'll always be dealing with this disease for the rest of my life. And in those first 2 years, really first 2.5 years, it was every day I would wake up and be yeah, do I want to bolt and leave town and, go on this drug spree, or do I want to stay here and try to deal with life on life's terms for another day? And that was it. What's interesting to me is that through the years, I have met so many people that just choose not to drink, right? Okay, so this is what's funny is when I meet people, there's some things that are baffling to me, right? When I have friends of mine that will be yeah, I went out and I had 1 margarita, and I'm if you're going to have, to be honest with you, I never loved the taste of margaritas. I think it sounds fun with Taco Tuesday or something, or a Mexican restaurant, but I never liked tequila. I never really liked margaritas. Okay. And so for me, when people are oh, I had 1 margarita, I'm what's the point? If you're not going to have 10, what's the point? I don't really get it. Right. And so, I do now, I know that people enjoy a glass of wine and a beer and all this. I get it. Right. But for me, it's always about the feeling. It's not that. Right. So that's crazy to me. But then on the other side, there's a lot of people that don't understand addiction and alcoholism. And they'll say things somebody just, I'm in my head because somebody just put this thing up on Facebook, and it was they equated, I think it was in the Vloggerinos group maybe, and they, I'll do a whole video about that, but they equated it, your phone, to eating issues and food issues and addiction. And it's don't touch your phone but 4 times a day. They were comparing it to food issues. And they said, just pick up your phone 4 times a day and do it on a limited time. Like, you're only allowed to be on your phone 4 times. If you find yourself wanting your phone or wanting to be on your phone more, now you know what it feels like to be a food addict. And I was like, that is so accurate. Like, that is so true. Because I think the majority of us are pretty addicted to our phones, right? And so, you know, like, it's interesting because I'll have, like, friends of mine that have said to me through the years, like, okay, like, is it really that big of a problem? Like, you couldn't just, like, stop and start. Like, my stepmom back in the day, like, when we were going trips and stuff, she'd, like, have a couple, you know, drinks or whatever when we would go, and then all of a sudden she'd just stop, and she'd start drinking Diet Coke, and I would be like, I don't understand. She's like, I don't want to feel like crap tomorrow, I don't want to have a hangover or whatever. She'd stop and start drinking Diet Cokes, and I'm like, girl, we are partying. Like, what is going on? You know, this is when I was like, the year before I got sober, 2 years before I got sober, whatever. I'm like, I don't understand, you know? We're like, she's like, I just don't want to feel like crap tomorrow. I want to walk on the beach. I want to get up at 6 or 7. My dad and my stepmom were avid runners, you know, always. So she'd be like, I want to run tomorrow. I don't want to feel like crap. That makes no sense to me. That makes absolutely no sense to me, right? So I've had friends of mine through the years be like, well, can't you just, like, stop? And, like, when you realize that, like, you're buzzed, and I'm like, that's not how my mind is wired, right? So when I started meeting people that chose not to drink, it was like crazy to me, right? And so I remember there was a doctor that I worked with back in the day, and she and her husband were like addictionologists, famous addictionologists in this country, and they didn't drink. And they didn't really have, like, they had family history of alcoholism, but they didn't really have, like, they weren't themselves. And I said something to her one time, because we were really close, and I said, why don't you drink? Like, you're not an alcoholic. Like, you know, if you don't have a problem with it, why don't you drink? And she goes, you know, when we started working here, she was like, for like our first year or something, she was like, we would go home, like, first 2 years, she was like, we would go home every night after being here all day long for 10, 12 hours. And we would go home, and, you know, we met with all these people whose lives were destroyed from addiction and things like that. And she was like, we would go home and make dinner. This was before the kids. And she was like, we would make dinner, and we would, like, have a glass of wine or, you know, 2 or whatever while we were drinking, or while we were eating. We would have, like, you know, open a bottle of wine, have a glass of wine or 2. And she was like, one night, she was like, we came home and we just were, like, getting ready to open this bottle of wine, and we were like, what's the point? Like, do we really need to have this wine? Like, it doesn't bring us anything. We're drinking it with dinner. Yes, that's fine. But we, like, see people's lives destroyed over this. And she's like, we just made the decision from that point on. There was, like, really no need for us to drink or have it. She's like, we just made the decision at that point that we weren't going to drink anymore. Then years ago, so, okay, we've been married 13 years, so I've known Melissa for like 13 and a half years. My friend Melissa and Jason. So, Melissa doesn't drink at all. Now, her husband drinks. He, not heavily, but he'll drink like a beer when we go out. He and Alex will have a beer or something like that, or a glass of wine. And so, Melissa, when I met her, she, like, they have, like, this bar in their kitchen. It's, like, goes into their living room. And it's, like, her husband, Jason, loves, like, IPAs and stuff like that. So, it has, like, these special different IPAs on the top. But the rest of it is all stocked with Pepsi, because she is a huge Pepsi addict, okay? And so, I was like, you don't drink? Like, this is so baffling to me. She was really, like, the first person that I ever met that, like, by choice didn't drink. And I'll never forget, like, talking to her. And I was like, you don't drink at all? She's like, no, I don't drink at all. And I was like, you don't do a shot? She's like, I think maybe in the last, like, 10 years, I've done, like, a birthday shot, like, one time, because everybody was doing one, so I did it. She's like, but no, I don't do shots. I don't have a drink. I don't drink at all. I don't even have a glass of champagne with a toast. I'll toast a Pepsi. And I was like, at all? And she's like, at all. And I was like, why? Like, why'd you make that decision? Like, it was, like, a pretty firm stance against alcohol, right? She said, you know, when I was in college, she said, I drank enough. She was like, I didn't drink overboard. She was like, I never, like, drank and got in trouble or anything like that. But she was like, I just realized I didn't like how I felt, you know, and I didn't need it. And she was like, so when I was done with college, I just made the decision that I wasn't going to drink anymore. And she's like, and I haven't. I have such mad respect for that, right? Like, that you don't need to engage in all that. It's like purity of mind and things like that, right? I mean, I don't, like, anybody that wants to drink, have a drink, whatever, you know? We went out to dinner with a couple that we've been friends with for 16 years last night. You know, they were all having drinks, and, you know, whatever. It was like nobody was drunk. It was just like a glass of wine at dinner. It was fun. We had a nice night, you know? And I had a Diet Coke, and it was whatever. But, like, I have respect for somebody that, like, thinks through their life and makes a choice like that. Like the person that reached out to me that said one day, you know what, I'm pregnant, so they quit drinking because they were pregnant. And then after that was just like, this isn't what I want to do anymore. And now they've been sober, and consider them sober, right? Like, that is sober. Like, just because, I think this is, like, for people, when I say I'm in recovery, that to me indicates working a 12-step program. Sobriety means something different to me than it means to other people. But when people say to me, I'm sober, and what I'll always say is like, oh, like, well, how do you do it? Like, are you like in a 12-step program? Do you go to church? Like, what do you do? And a lot of people will be like, no, it's just a decision that I made like 20 years ago. I just haven't drank or, drugged since. And there are people that typically were not hardcore alcoholics or addicts. I think it's a different thing when you're a hardcore alcoholic or addict and you make that choice. It's like, okay, there's a missing piece there. There's people that you've hurt. There's things you have to do that you have to work on. That's like the purpose of the 12-step program or therapy or maintenance programs or counseling or church or whatever, right? Whatever way you choose to do it. But there's a lot of people out there in the world now that are choosing just to not drink or not drug, and I think that's really cool, A couple of years ago, I saw this article, and it was like this girl had put this article out, and it was like, I'm sure you can look it up, because it was like a viral article somebody sent to me, and she was like, she quit drinking. It had been a year, and she quit drinking. And she's like, this is how my life has changed in a year of not drinking. And she explained what her life was like before she was drinking, and she was not a heavy alcoholic. But she would go out from time to time with her friends. She got drunk sometimes, not always. She'd have a drink at home or a beer or a glass of wine, but she just decided one day, like, I'm going to do a year of not drinking, right? And she was like, I was like amazed. Because as a person in recovery, that like ruined my life, hurt people from my addiction, and it wasn't just directly related to alcohol and drugs. That's the thing. Like when we talk about addiction, right? I think the easy go-to is that addiction is really about drugs and alcohol, when really that's but a symptom of our addiction. Addiction is really about how we think, how we treat people, how we talk to people, the way that our minds work, things like that, right? It's a thinking disease, not a drinking disease. But when people decide that they just don't want to drink anymore, okay, but they don't have all those isms, right? Then what it is that they become like their most, amazing self on some level. And I'm not saying that everybody has to do it. Like I said, my husband drinks, right? Like I've never once been like, you need to quit drinking, you need to whatever. We have rules and boundaries and stuff around that. People ask us all the time, like, what are the boundaries? What are the rules? Like those, we have boundaries around that. We're in a situation where I'm like, there's a lot of drinking going on and I don't want to be alone. I'm like, could you please just not drink for tonight? And he's like, yeah, absolutely. That's fine. But like we have a lot of rules and boundaries and stuff like that around that have been set since like day one that we were in this relationship. I wouldn't be in this relationship if there weren't rules and boundaries set. I wouldn't be in a relationship with somebody that was a drinker if I wasn't able to have rules and boundaries. But since Melissa, I've met quite a few people that have just chosen not to drink or not to smoke pot or not to do this or do that, And it's always, to me, it's like I love my family of sobriety, right? But that is such a cool thing to not have a problem and choose that you're not going to engage in anymore because you just don't need it, right? I think it's such a wake-up call. And so she wanted me to do a video on the reasons why people get sober. And I think it's a really important question to ask yourself, With addicts and alcoholics, I think those of us that do get sober out of necessity, of saving our lives, of saving our futures, of repairing our relationships with our families, of repairing our relationships with our friends, for having something in our future, right? But if you're not an addict, saving a job, not getting kicked out of your house, whatever, but for everybody else, if you just choose to get sober and you're not an addict or alcoholic, there's a lot of reasons. Maybe saving money. Maybe you just are spending a lot of money on alcohol that you don't need to spend anymore. Even if you're not an alcoholic, let's say if you're drinking 2 to 3, 4 bottles of wine a week, that's a lot of money, right? That you're spending on alcohol, And I had this friend of mine not 20 years ago, probably 15 years ago, that smoked pot a lot. Not every day, not chronically, but smoked a lot. And I said something like, how much money are you spending on pot? And because they were having some money problems and whatever. And he said something to me, was he and his wife, and he said something to me about, she said something different to me than he did, but he said something to me about, it was I can't remember how much it was at the time, but I think it was $200 to $300 a month. And I was like, that's a good chunk of money, okay? For just do you need it? And he was like, well, blah, 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 whatever. And this is what I always say to people, right? If your resistance to getting rid of it, if it's causing problems in any area of your life, if you're waking up and you don't feel great, hungover on a regular basis, or if it's costing you money that you don't have, or you just don't like how you feel, or it's causing you problems in your family, and you're thinking about quitting, or people are suggesting maybe you quit or slow down, and you're resistant to that, chances are you might have more of a problem than you think you do, right? And that's what I always say to people. I know people in my personal life that smoke pot on a regular basis. I know people that drink on a regular basis. I don't judge that. that, you know? That's somebody else's decision. But when it starts becoming a problem financially, emotionally, it's affecting your family, it's affecting your life, that's when maybe you need to take a look at that. But I got mad respect for people that are just like, one day, no, I decided I didn't need it. I didn't need it. Like, I love that, right? Because I'll tell you why I love that. Because I wish that could have been me, right? But I mean, I had a lot of good times drinking, smoking weed, the whole 9 yards, all the drugs. I had a lot of fun, but I had a lot of bad times too, right? So I have mad respect for that because I wish I could have been that person and just be like, nope, enough is enough, right? You know, I'm not that person. I'm the person that's one is too many and 1,000 is never enough. But I think it's an interesting conversation. Like, why do people just decide, you know, I actually have had friends of mine in my life. I've shared this story before. I've had friends of mine in my life that have never drank and never done a drug. And they're my age. And they just chose to never drink or never drug, right? I know people that have family histories of addiction. And so they just, out of, you know, they grew up with an alcoholic father or mother or whatever, or their brother or sister went through a lot of problems when they were growing up. So they just decided they were never going to drink or use drugs. And they never have. They've never drank or used drugs. Never gotten drunk, not even once. Never smoked weed. And they're my age. And these are hip people. They're not like, not cool people. They're cool people, right? And they just made that decision that they didn't want to go down that same road. That's like really, for me, smart. Like, that's like learning the lesson, you know? And so I think it's a very cool thing. I have a couple friends of mine that have been sober for 2 or 3 years. They don't go to 12-step meetings. They, whatever, you know, and they don't have the necessity to do that. But they also don't have the necessity to drink or use drugs and lean on that anymore. And they've had other outlets for how they have fixed issues with their life. And I think it's amazing, you know. I think it's a question to ask. You know, I think for anybody out there, and I'm not trying to convince anybody, but the article was so powerful to me, you know. Oh, this is what I was going to say, was that I had my sponsor's wife, that was my second sponsor, but he passed away from a heroin addiction, and after they were divorced and stuff, but she had her daughter, like, she got pregnant while she was still using, and like right after that got sober. And so her daughter was born, her daughter's probably like 30 now or something, but her daughter was born, well, okay, she's like she's probably 32 at this point now. So her daughter was born actually when she was in prison. And so like when she was getting right out of prison. And so her daughter was like born sober and things like that. She used to bring her to meetings on, I loved this. I mean, it's not really 12-step, but people didn't care and I loved it. She would bring her to meetings on her birthday and she would get a coin because she had like grown up, you know, in 12-step meetings and stuff like that. And I love that. And sadly, you know, she's still sober. Well, my friend's wife is still sober, and I knew her first because I used to work with her. But her ex-husband passed away, who was my second sponsor that literally saved my life. And he sadly never got it for himself and died of a heroin overdose, you know. So I share that story. But that article, but I've shared that story quite a bit in the past. But that article that I read, like, it really put a lot of things in perspective for me, you know? And so when people call me now, I'm like, just give it a try, 30 days. See how you feel, you know? See how you feel. If nothing changes and at the end of 30 days, you're like, yeah, I don't think really alcohol impacts me that much, then go buy you a bottle of wine and get back to it, you know? You know, in 12-step programs, we always say, we will gladly refund your misery if you don't find what you're looking for, right? It's like, people always say, it's a cult, it's a cult. You know, what's so crazy to me about that is that there's no locked doors. Ain't nobody keeping you there, okay? You don't have to come unless you're court ordered. Nobody's keeping you there, right? It's not, that's what's so funny to me. It's like, okay, a cult that you can come and go and never come again, and nobody's gonna, you know, hunt you down and all that. Okay, I guess it's a cult then, you know? But, you know, I'm always just like, hey, like, give it 30 days, see how you feel. At the end of the 30 days, if you feel better, maybe you want to quit drinking for a while. Maybe you'll pick it up a year from now. You know, I've had a lot of people that I've known that have quit for 6 months or a year and then went back, and they changed how they drank. You know, they drank differently or smoked pot differently. But I think it's an interesting conversation to have on, you know, and I'd like to know in the comment section below if you're somebody that has quit drinking for periods of your life or stopped drinking altogether and you're not in recovery. What was the reason, maybe if you feel comfortable sharing this, what was the reason why you chose to drink? I think it's interesting. I've known a lot of women that when they got pregnant quit drinking and then just never went back to it, you know? I think it's so interesting. So anyway, let me know what you think in the comment section below. Thank you so much for this topic. You know who you are. I love you guys, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.